So I guess we can start. Dear audience, we are going to hold a very interesting seminar today. The official title is Dedollarization, the Revolt Against the US Dollar and the Rise of a New Financial World Order. So the topic is extremely interesting, extremely dangerous, and extremely intelligent. It's a very intelligent, futuristic topic, futuristic in the sense of politico-economic future of the world. As you all know, the US dollar can be defined as the most important export item of the American economy. It's an export item. It's not an export good. It's not an export service. It's a currency, but it's basically an export item for the US. It's the reserve currency of the world. So every nation other than the US needs to hold US dollar in their official reserves of the government as well as the central banks. And at the same time, households, companies all around the world, from Australia to Mongolia to whatever different countries, they hold what we can still call a reserve, a personal reserve, a company reserve, and most of those global reserves are held in the form of US dollars. A tiny portion of it is held in the form of euros, and a very minimal part of it is held in the form of other currencies. So in this sense, I think it is very fair to say that US dollar is now the most significant export item of the US economy. But will the US dollar survive as a currency, as a reserve currency? Will it continue to be the main hard currency of the world? And if that is not going to happen, meaning if the US dollar may not survive as an international currency, what is the implication of this for the American as well as the world economy? So these are very, very important questions for an economist, for policymakers, decision makers, statesmen, companies, everybody. So Dr. Gal Luft has endeavored to respond to that very important question. And he and his co-author authored an excellent book in 2019 as an answer to this question. The book was published by Amalfi Press. It's an international publisher. And the book has acclaimed significant reputation. And now we are very happy at OSTİM Technical University to host a webinar, almost like a midterm launch of the book about all these topics. And personally, I am, and I'm sure you also are, looking forward to listening to Dr. Gal Luft. The way we are going to go forward is I will very briefly introduce Dr. Gal Luft, his background, and then he will present the topic to us in about 30 minutes or so, and then we will have a question and answer session. So we'll be accepting questions through the chat facility of this platform. I will convey those questions as well as my own questions. So we'll hold all together something like another 50-55 minutes of this webinar, and the webinar will be posted on OSTİM Technical University's YouTube channel. So you can refer to it later as well. So who is Dr. Gal Luft? First of all, he is a professor at OSTİM Technical University, and he will soon be leading a research center at OSTİM Technical University. But at the same time, he is the co-director of the Institute for Analysis of Global Security, IAGS, which is a think tank based in Washington. And that think tank is focused on energy security and economic issues, trends. He has a PhD from a very well-known institution, Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. He has been a senior advisor to the United States Security Council. He also has been an advisor to the top decision makers in China. And now he is semi-based in Turkey. We hope that he will be fully based in Turkey, but now he's only half Turkish-based. He is a very prolific author. He has published in the best international journals in his field, including foreign policy and other well-known journals. And he is the co-author of a number of very important books about energy security, mainly, and the financial order of the world. And most recently, before the Dedollarization book, he has also written a book about the Belt and Road Initiative. The title of that book is Silk Road 2.0, U.S. Strategy Towards China's Belt and Road Initiative. He's actually one of the masterminds behind the I think I am allowed to say that, Gal, that he is one of the masterminds behind the Silk and Road initiative as well. And I think this is a brief but informative description of his background. So now the floor is yours, Dr. Gal.
Thank you, and thank you for welcoming me to OSTİM University, which gave me a very warm home in Ankara, and it makes a difference in one's life. The book Dedollarization, which I hope soon this weekend maybe publish it in Turkey too, for Turkish audience, because I've noticed that Turkish people like to read a lot of books.
Actually, we'll be hopefully publishing it very soon through OSTİM Technical University Press in Turkish.
Yes. And but before I delve into the issue of de-dollarization, I just want to make one or two comments about money, which is something that is so central to our lives, and yet many people don't understand the mechanism of money. So the first thing I want to point out that what makes money? What is money? So in order for something to qualify as money, it has to do two things. One is it has to be a store of value. Store of value means that it maintains the value. So, for example, if I take this piece of paper which says 100 Turkish lira, and I can buy a meal with this piece of paper, I want to make sure that more or less next year I can still buy the same meal, or maybe there'll be variations due to inflation, but the money, this piece of paper, will store its value. It's important to point that out because many people, for example, refer to Bitcoin as money, but it's very hard to take something that one day worth $60,000 and the next day, because somebody tweeted something, all of a sudden it goes down to, it loses 1/3 of its value. That's not really a store of value. Okay. The second qualifier for money is it needs to be a means of exchange. What does it mean? It means that everybody is willing to accept it and give something for it. So again, if I take the example of Bitcoin, Bitcoin, you cannot go to most restaurants. If you go to, you want to pay in Bitcoin, you cannot. Or if you want to buy a car in Bitcoin, or you want to buy a house in Bitcoin, you can't. So it's not really a means of exchange, and it's not really a store of value. whereas all the other currencies, even the Turkish lira, which has suffered a little bit of volatility recently, but it's still what money really is. The second thing I want to explain is where we are in the history of money. Because the history of money has gone through phases, and we are now at the beginning of a new era in the history of money. Money really, you know, in the ancient days, before we had money, everybody bartered. So you'd go somewhere and you'd give someone a bottle of olive oil, and you'd get a box of tomatoes, and that's how it worked. Everybody bartered. But it became very difficult to barter, especially when the economy began to grow. And then people started to exchange products and commodities for precious commodities like gold, nickel, copper, or silver. So there was what we call commodity money, money that was made out of precious commodity. Later on, we moved into the era of what we call representative money. That happened in the 13th century during the Yuan dynasty, when the Mongols, Kublai Khan, ruled the Mongol Empire. And it was a very large empire. It stretched many, many thousands of kilometers. And it was very inconvenient to move gold or silver over long distances. So they created the paper money. The paper money means that the money was backed by a precious commodity like gold. So that was the first generation. The second generation of money was the representative money. Then we moved to what we call fiat money. Fiat money is what we have today. Is money that is a piece of paper backed by government, and the government tells you, we tell you this is worth so and so, and you believe it, and everybody believe it, and we all accept this, and we all transact with each other. So we essentially, since 1971, when Richard Nixon pulled the US out of the gold standard, we disconnected our money from precious commodities. So there's no more, and every government can print as much money as it wants with consequences, but it can still expand its money supply. What we are today at a point that we are moving into a new phase in the history of money. We are moving into digital money. In other words, we're still using sovereign money. Still, governments control the supply of money, but like everything in life, we have virtualized everything. So we are also virtualizing money, and we already see it taking the first steps of this, with more and more countries are looking into digital currencies, which means it's the same currency like we have today, but in a digital format. And there is a whole debate about the pros and cons of this. It's a very interesting debate. We don't have time to go into this, but I think we have to understand that we are at the brink of a new era in the history of money. Now, we mentioned before that what gives America its real power in the world, and many people think that America's power comes from the military, the United States military, but don't forget that in order to keep a military that and funded at a level of $700 billion a year, it doesn't come out of thin air. You really need to have a very strong economy, and what gives America its edge is the fact that the dollar, since the Second World War, and even a little bit before, but the official crowning of the dollar as reserve currency of the world was in 1944 during the Bretton Woods conference. And then everybody accepted the notion that dollar is the new king, replacing the sterling. And ever since then, the dollar was the reserve currency. And I always like to explain, when people ask me, what is reserve currency? I give the example of the English language. Okay, if we did not have the English language, everybody would have to converse with everybody through bilaterally, and we'd have to learn many languages in order to to communicate internationally. But the English language allows us to all converge around one language, and everybody learns the English language so we can communicate internationally. Same thing for the dollar. The dollar is the hub that connects all the spokes. Countries keep their reserves in dollars because that's a currency that they know that everybody will accept. And also they want to protect their own currencies for in the event that something happens and there is a run on the bank or a major devaluation of the currency. They want to protect their own foreign exchange reserves from those type of fluctuations. So for the United States, this is a huge privilege. It's a huge privilege because it gives the Americans two things. First of all, they can, when you have a reserve currency, you can essentially accumulate almost as much debt as you want. You can print as many dollars as you want. You don't have to worry. If you need on money, like now with a COVID pandemic, the United States needed to inject into the economy trillions of dollars. So they just in the past year increased the deficit by $5 trillion. $5 trillion. This is something that a normal country cannot do. $5 trillion is almost 1/4 of the GDP of the United States. If Turkey wanted to increase its debt by equivalent of 1/4 of its GDP, it would be impossible, right? No country can do it. But the United States was able to do it just now and probably will do much more. So the only reason they were able to do it, to print so many dollars, is because they know that there will be somebody around the world and even in the United States itself that will agree to absorb this debt and to buy this debt in the form of bond, government issues, bond, treasury bonds. The second thing that a reserve currency gives you is that it allows you to control what I call the plumbing of the global financial system. So for example, if I don't like a certain country and I want to punish this country economically, I don't have the ability to do it other than maybe to limit my exports to this country or something like this. But the United States, by virtue of the fact that the dollar is a reserve currency, can apply sanctions, can apply a lot of coercive measures, and it can integrate this into its foreign policy. And today, 1 out of 10 countries in the world are under some US sanctions. And every other day we hear about another sanction that the US has imposed. Even Turkey was on the receiving end of several rounds of sanctions for its various disagreements that it had with the United States. But obviously the main countries that have seen the impact of sanctions, like Iran, like Venezuela, like Russia, and countries that are involved in various human rights violations and so forth. And the number is growing and growing. So the reason the United States can do it is because it has this power over the financial system. It can come to any bank and say, look, if you trade with the Iranian, if you do business with North Korea or with Russia, we will block you from the dollar system, which for any commercial bank, this would be a death sentence. Banks cannot afford to be disconnected from the dollar system. And therefore, the banks are extremely subservient to the American government, because nobody can afford to get in trouble. And there are also huge fines, etc. So that's a privilege that the US has had over many years. The thesis of my book is that things are beginning to change. This special status, this privilege that the US has had, served it since the Second World War and served it very well. But the world is changing, and that's the point of my book. And you have to recognize those changes and understand that things that you could do yesterday, you may not be able to do tomorrow. And why is it? First of all, because I think that the US has exaggerated or overstepped its, has had a light finger on the trigger of financial sanctions. And every time that there is a problem in the world, somebody in Congress initiates a sanctions bill, and you never get off this list. By the way, sanctions are not only against companies, against governments, but also against companies, against individuals. There are tens of thousands of people around the world that are blacklisted for various reasons. Many of them are not because they did any crime. They just acted against the will of the US government. And that may not be a crime for which you go to prison in any judicial system, but the United States decided that because you have done something against its national interest, you'll be blocked from the global financial system. In other words, no bank will want to open an account for you, and so forth. You will not be able to to own a company or to sit on the board of a company. So this really list of the blacklist of individual corporations, governments, government companies, etc., is growing and growing and growing, and people always seem to be added, but very rarely people are being taken off this list. And over time, we've seen the creation of a club of people and governments and corporations who are united by the grievances, by the sense of injustice, by the sense that they are being targeted unfairly, in their view, and penalized and marginalized. And this club is growing. And now the members of this club, of the de-dollarization club, what I call, are beginning to cooperate with each other. They say, okay, let's find ways to get around the dollar system. Let's build mechanisms that allow us to transact and trade around the dollar. Let's reduce the dollar, the weight of the dollar plays in our foreign exchange reserves. Let's shift to other currencies. Let's shift to gold. Let's shift to cryptocurrencies. So there are many, many new ways in which countries and individuals and corporations can bypass the dollar system, and also to cooperate with each other in doing it. And I think that the main, there's always been pushback against this dollar system. And but this pushback has always come from relatively minor players like Libya during the Gaddafi time, Saddam Hussein, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela has been very vocal about this. And even Russia for years has been opposed to this system, and Vladimir Putin has been very vocal about this. I would even say that BRICS, this organization that includes Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, we know today that the establishment of BRICS was to a large extent a plot against the dollar. How do we know it? Because in 2000, De Silva, when he was in prison, he admitted that the rationale behind the creation of BRICS was to put an end to the dollar system. But all of these actors were relatively small. And what has changed? What changed? And the United States never really took this threat very seriously. But what is changing now is China. You have to understand, this is the game changer. China is soon going to be the world's largest economy. According to some estimation, it is already the largest economy in the world. It is still has a lot of growth potential. it is more and more playing the role of superpower. It is has global ambitions. It is already experimenting with digital currencies. It is a country that is no longer willing to play second fiddle to the United States. It sees itself as a great power. And China also is under what it views as economic attack by the United States. Both the Trump administration and the Biden administration have made it very clear that they see China as an economic threat. And even if they don't admit it, if we judge by their actions, we see that they are doing everything they can to undermine China's economic growth through trade war, through various export controls and the denial of critical technologies, etc., etc. So if I want to be very blunt, I would say that China and the United States are already at an economic war with each other, maybe even Cold War, and perhaps even this will be even worse in the years to come. Maybe it will develop into a hot war. So China now views itself as a country under economic blockade or under economic attack, particularly as they see that the United States is tightening its alliances with Japan, with South Korea, with the G7 countries. And China understands that it cannot be dependent on the US dollar. So China is now thinking very hard how to internationalize its own currency, how to build systems that are alternative to the SWIFT system, which is the system that oversees all financial transactions around the world. China is trying, for example, to de-dollarize its trade. So bilateral trade of China and other countries is increasingly shifting from dollars to alternative currencies. The China-Russia bilateral trade is already almost fully de-dollarized. And China is, as you know, investing a lot in Africa and in the developing world. Professor Murat mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, or the New Silk Road, which is an initiative to connect China and Europe and North Africa and East Africa through a vast network of transportation systems, roads, ports, airports, internet cables, etc., to enhance the connectivity. And China is using the Belt and Road mechanism as a way to de-dollarize not only its own economy, but also the economies of those Belt and Road countries, which is one reason why the United States is so concerned about the Belt and Road and is trying to actively undermine it. One thing that is very important to pay attention to is oil and energy commodities in general. And why is it? Because in 1975, something very important happened in history that did not get a lot of attention, but turned out to be a very, very important development. That was when Henry Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia, and he made an agreement with the Saudi king that in exchange for US protection, the Saudis will conduct all of their trade of oil in dollars. And by extension, all the other OPEC countries did the same. And over time, almost all of the world's oil was traded in US dollars. Now, why is it so important? Because Kissinger understood something very important. He realized that if the United States economy is to grow, he needs to guarantee endless demand for dollars. As long as there is a demand for dollars, the United States economy will be able to grow. How do you create endless demand for dollars? You attach dollar to oil. So as the world economy grows, we need more cars, more planes, we need more oil, and therefore we need more dollars. And that worked really, really well for many years because it really fed the demand for dollars, which today, by the way, just to give you a sense, oil and gas, the oil and gas market, just the commodity, without the derivatives, without the refined product, just the commodities, is about a $7.5 trillion market, which is almost equivalent to the gold market. Okay, so that means that as long as there is demand for oil and gas, and by the way, it also extended to other commodities, food commodities, corn, soy, etc. Everything is traded now in dollars. And now we're seeing that this is changing. It means that now when China is buying oil from Russia, it says to the Russian, hey, why should we not do it in our own currencies? And that's exactly what they're doing. And the same thing has happened with other partners when China is trading with Angola oil, or now even with Iraq. You know, China is making a lot of investment in the Iraqi oil sector. And the Chinese say, hey, let's do it in other currencies. You need to buy things from us. So you might as well pay us in yuan and in our own currencies, and we'll send you what you need. You'll send us oil and we'll send you cell phones or TVs or cars. And this is what we are seeing today. It is already happening. Now, how fast will it happen? Will the dollar lose its special status? These are very important questions, and they depend on a lot of variables. What we do know from history is that we've had several reserve currencies in history, always connected to the empire de jure, whoever was the empire, whether it was Portugal or Holland or France or the British Empire and now the American Empire. Whoever was the empire of the day, their currency was the reserve currency. But what we learned from history is that the average life of a reserve currency was between 80 and 100 years. So about a century, let's say 1 century, that has been the average lifespan of a reserve currency. And we are, with regards to the dollar, we are about there, okay? We are nearly there. So we are at a point that we can say, based on the history of the world, that the dollar is approaching the average life expectancy of previous reserve currencies. Now, whether it will be shorter or longer, we don't know. Well, what it depends on? It depends on several elements. First of all, it depends on whether China will succeed in internationalizing its own currency and create competition to the dollar. Right now, China is very slow in doing this, because having your currency play an international role means that you have to liberalize your system. You have to be more transparent. There are a lot of implications for this, internal implications, that China is not ready to do a lot of things that will require it to do in order for its currency to be internationally accepted. I don't think that China in its current system will be able to make its currency, the yuan, reserve currency. But my view of this is that we may not be in the same situation that we had before, that one currency replaced the other. What we are more likely to see in the future is movement from one currency to what I call currency multipolarity, in which several currencies will compete against each other. There will not be one currency that everybody buys into, but several ones. And not all of them will be, by the way, fiat currencies. We could see cryptocurrencies. We could see return of gold in the game. For example, a combination of cryptocurrencies backed by precious metals. So many options here. What I think we will see a currency system that is very much resembles the geopolitical system, just like we're moving today back into an era of multipolarity, in which several great powers are vying for influence, and each sort of tries to position itself in its own sphere of influence. I think we will see a mirror image, something that will represent this new architecture in the currency world as well. And we will see much more diversity, and we will see the world is breaking into blocks, which will decide on the composition of their central banks of the countries in these blocks will decide on a new composition of currency in their reserves. The second thing that is very important variable, which will impact the future of the dollar, is what will happen to the Eurozone. Because when the Eurozone was established, that was believed to be the main competition to the dollar. But today we see that Europe is facing many challenges to its to the EU system, but also to its currency system. And where goes the euro, I think, will have an impact on the dollar. If the Eurozone will break, that will actually give the dollar advantage, because it will mean that the dollar has there'll be a run on the dollar. There'll be more demand for dollars. The second variable has to do with America itself, and that's perhaps the most important variable here. What will happen in the United States itself? The United States is facing many, many troubles today. The United States is facing trouble of trust. Fewer and fewer people trust the United States. Yes, we have a new president who is saying all the right things, and he's trying to rebuild the alliances after 4 years of Trump. But who is to say there will not be a rich Trump? So nobody's really can trust the United States to have really changed that Trump is not coming back, or maybe not Trump, but somebody of his type. And therefore, there is a lot of mistrust among most countries in the world about the future of the United States. There's also a lot of domestic problems, racial problems, and those things make people think maybe we should not put all of our eggs in one basket. Maybe we should diversify our portfolio and include other assets in our currency basket. And then there is also the issue of the debt. The American accumulation of debt is completely out of control. When I wrote the book, Dedollarization, it was in 2019, and one day there was a headline in the newspaper that US fiscal deficit hit $1 trillion a year, which was a huge, for me, it was a huge item, because, wow, that's $1 trillion, it's $1,000 billion deficit in 1 year. Now, if you think what happened only in the past year alone, with all the corona-related economic relief packages, the deficit has risen to 5 trillion. Now, I'm not saying that that will be the new normal, but we have normalized 1 trillion, something that was completely, totally normal. And the United States printing money like there is no tomorrow. And there is no no one to stop this. And in fact, what I've seen is very interesting. If you follow the American politics, you see that nobody is talking about fiscal conservatism. In fact, they did the exact opposite. Now they have created new ideologies, like something called the modern monetary theory, that actually says deficits are not a problem. Debt is not a problem. Government can print as much money as it wants. So it's sort of like somebody who is heavily addicted to smoking, concocting a new ideology saying that smoking is actually good because it's saving me from other problems that, oh, it's stress that is going to kill me. So when I smoke, I'm actually protecting my life from something that is much worse. That kind of mentality that we see today, that from something that used to be very, very unacceptable, and for years and years and years, mostly Republicans, but also Democrats, have always been very averse to deficits. Now they all accept it and also encourage it. So these are all some of the question marks. But if I have to sort of zoom out and finalize my thought, I would say that we are definitely at the brink of a new era. It's a slow-moving process. When you have a decline of any empire, it could happen fast, it could happen slow, it could happen slow and then very fast, like Hemingway once said, somebody, how did you go bankrupt? He said, gradually and then suddenly. So I think that this is probably what will happen. We are seeing the bankruptcy of America, financial bankruptcy, but also the moral bankruptcy. And we see indications of this all the time. And when people don't trust you, they also don't trust your currency. So unless we will see a major shift in America's approach to the world, I think we will see a continuous erosion of the dollar status as reserve currency, and that will have broad implications for the rest of the 21st century and beyond. So with this, I will maybe leave some time for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gal. This was really fascinating. Is a very interesting topic, and you have handled it in such a nice way. There is so much debate that can follow all of this, but of course we are time limited in this webinar. I have a number of, let's say, questions just to open it up further. But more than me, there are a number of questions that came from the chat window. So I'll try to blend them together and convey you some of those questions. You mentioned something that I liked very much. You used the word competition when talking about different currencies' relationship with each other. So you said the different currencies competing with each other. And then you said in the history, the reserve currency went hand in hand with the empire. That was also very interesting. Like you mentioned, the Portuguese empire, which was a very bloody empire, actually, and then the British, etc. One thing I could add to it is that the capital movements accelerated only in the last century. Yes, there was capital movements also in the 19th century, 20th century, etc. But it is peaking now. It's peaking. It's redefining itself. So this close relationship between the empire, like the American empire, let's say, that's also a concept you used. That close relationship between the empire and the reserve currency, now that coupling is much more stronger than before because of the technological development plus the developments in the capital markets, which is simply, it boils down to the fact that now the capital movements are much faster than before. And one interesting footnote there is the Soviet Empire. They also had an empire which collapsed very quickly because of this or that reason, whatever. But I was wondering whether or not they could establish the Russian money, ruble, as a reserve currency. Maybe it circulated a lot in the Eastern companies, the Iron Curtain countries, but not the other sides of the world. That also gives you, I don't know, a different debate about why that empire and the currency didn't go hand in hand. Another thing is, you mentioned about China and this Cold War or hot war or whatever war, commercial war between, accelerating between the US and them. And you said now there will be a multipolarity, your expectation. So there won't be the reserve currency, but there will be a set of reserve currencies. One question there is whether yuan really, you said you don't think that it will happen, but whether yuan will have a chance to become a reserve currency, at least in the ASEAN side, in the eastern side of the world. How about Europe? We know that Europe is now struggling with everything, all the economic challenges, political challenges, social challenges. But does Euro have a chance? That's another interesting question of becoming at least a regional but bigger than Europe type of reserve currency. One question that came was, what is the, although you mentioned about it still, but I will ask it because it came up. What is the, let's say, opportunity for the cryptocurrencies to become a reserve or stronger type of currency? You mentioned in the history the representative money. If I'm understanding correctly, it is like the Bretton Woods system in a way, the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol, the Turkish, let's say, dynasty in China. You said that it was very interesting for me. That period looks like the representative money. Could you perhaps open that up a little bit? And what can we learn from it today? Another question, there is an objection to you. I will read it. Süleyman Gündüz asks, barter, you said barter being a universal prelude to money. He says, this is a misconclusion given the archaeological findings. He says the notion of credit was created before everything, including barter. So this is an objection to your reasoning.
I agree. Yeah, that is right.
Yeah. And let me see my notes. And yes, one last thing is am I missing something? Yeah, one last thing is, there is a literature. Actually, I was the co-author of a book on that literature as well. We wrote a small book from Peter Lang, a Swiss publisher. The title of the book is Money Matters. And the rest of the title is I forgot the name of the long title, but it's basically, it talks about why the circulation velocity of money, you know that the velocity of money is not anymore stable. And that means that Friedman's or the classical economists' quantity theory of money doesn't hold anymore. The reason being the volatility of money now is changing a lot. And therefore, people like Stephen Keen, who is a British economist, who I think now is teaching in Australia, he reminds us, and it's the main theme in our book as well, he reminds us that fiat money equals debt money. So the current version of money means that the money we have has two characters. One is an asset for those people who hold it, who are long in it, but at the same time, it is a debt for the governments. What do you think of that? And then they say that is one of the reasons why the current monetary system will not survive. And why there is also, it also explains, as we talked about it in our book, why, for example, the American Central Bank cannot create inflation, despite the fact that they are printing so much money, but they are not able to create inflation. Anyway, these are interesting topics. Some of them are questions. Some of them are just leads for you to just, you know, continue your argumentation. What would you like to tell about these things? And we have about 10-15 minutes now left.
Okay, so I'll try to pack as much as possible. First, let me make an observation that a change in monetary system, or every one of the times that there was a change from one reserve currency to another, let's go back to the transition from the pound sterling to the dollar, okay? It never happens under normal circumstances. It only happens as a result of a great mayhem, an implosion of a current system, either after, in the case of the British Empire, it took 2 world wars and a pandemic and a Great Depression, and so it took a long period of turmoil to end one dynasty and to give rise to a new dynasty. Okay, so these things never happen when the sea is calm. So if there is to be a change, a major change in the global monetary system, I'm afraid, very afraid, that it will happen under very nasty circumstances. It will either be a major financial crisis, much, much bigger than what we've seen in 2008, probably in conjunction to a very, very painful geopolitical event. So it's not going to be under normal circumstances, okay? But when you have a great disruption of any kind, that is the point in time that you rebuild the new order. And then everything is on the table. When you have this Bretton Woods moment, everything is on the table. Because you really need to put all the pieces together after this great disruption. And I'm saying it because when you look today at the financial system, you see something very interesting. Where is all the money in the world? So when you look at where the money in the world is, you see you have the cash, you have the gold, you have all the other precious metals, you have real estate, you have stocks, you have bonds, you have all the debt instruments, and you put them all together, and you see that they are making a fraction, a tiny fraction of something much bigger, which is what we call an asset class that we hear very little about, but it is what Warren Buffett calls a nuclear grade weapon. And this is the derivative market. Most of the world's money today is locked into the derivative market. Now, what is a derivative? Nobody really knows. You know, a lot of people talk about it, but a derivative is a reflection of an asset. The best way to explain what a derivative is to imagine a room which has one cup. This is the cup, and there's only one of them. But if I put a mirror on the wall, now I have 2 cups, okay? One, the one I'm holding in my hand, and then there is another one that is reflected in the mirror. But then what happens when I add another mirror to the room? Now we have, they begin to reflect each other. Now think about a room that is full of mirrors on the floor, on the ceiling, everywhere. Now you see the same cup thousands of times, and you believe that this cup,
actually infinite times. Just 2 mirrors make it infinite times.
Yes, of course, but there's only one cup, and that's my point. The world economy today is a hall of mirrors, where there's no more connection between the real asset and the virtual asset and the imaginary assets and all of those wizards in Wall Street that have concocted all kind of financial instruments that nobody really knows. Now, you ask yourself, what happens when the biggest asset class by far is blowing? And we've seen a little bit of this in 2008 when those mortgage, mortgage assets, those phony instruments that were created by all kind of wizards in Wall Street, when this particular sector blew, and it almost took the global economy to a verge of destruction. Now think about what happens today when there's so much more of those, when trillions and trillions of dollars are locked into all these phony markets that nobody can even explain anymore. Then you could see a meltdown of epic proportions. And when that happens, who knows? Who knows? And therefore, I'm saying if the dollar is to lose its status, it will not happen quietly. The dollar will go up in flames as part of the system that it enabled to create. And then you can use your imagination and try to think for yourself how it could evolve. I'm definitely not the one that can predict accurately how it will be triggered and how the dominoes will fall. But what I do know is that those type of moments produce opportunity for overhauling the entire system. Now, I should say that groupings or currency groupings like the euro, and by the way, you mentioned Russia, there was an attempt to create an international ruble. There was a group called the Comecon during the Cold War, which was led by Russia, and they tried to get all the Soviet countries to accept this international ruble. It wasn't very successful only because of implementation, but the idea was to create a sort of a eurozone for the Soviet countries. What we may see is what I call the anti-hegemonic countries. Anti-hegemonic countries, I'm talking about China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Pakistan, probably Turkey, probably a group of countries that will be more and more aligned and will join each other into a new bloc of, let's call it anti-dollar bloc. And I don't know if they will create a new currency. I don't think so, but it will be more of a trading system backed by all kind of debt instruments and so forth. So we could see arrangements like this. We're not there yet, but again, you know, the interesting thing about the time of our time today, that everything happens in an accelerated way. Okay, if something used to take 100 years, 1,000 years ago, now it will take 10 years or even less. So because of the flow of information and capital is so much more accelerated, and media, things happen very quickly, and we cannot underestimate the possibility for those type of changes, especially because we are learning so much about the unfairness and the ugly side of capitalism and all the things that are happening. You know, how trillion-dollar companies in America are abusing the system and are acting like monopolies in a very non-competitive behavior. And there's a lot of casualties around all over. So I feel that we are at the brink of something very exciting, but also very painful and very deadly. The system as it is today is unsustainable. It is not sustainable. And if something is not sustainable, it will not be sustained. It will end one day. How it will end, what will be the height of the temperatures or the flames, we don't know that. But we have a very dangerous situation today, particularly with regards to the relations between the US and China. And I want to leave you with this thought. The United States and China today represent more than half of the world's growth. Okay? All the rest of the countries together contribute the other half. So I like to resemble it to a plane which has two engines. And those two engines are what keeps the plane in the air. But all of a sudden, those two engines begin to snipe at each other and to fight. I had an article recently which I said, you know, it's like two co-pilots fighting, flying a plane, and then they begin in the middle of the air, they begin to fight each other. And there are 193 passengers at the back that all of a sudden see how the plane is losing altitude. This is a very dangerous moment because of this, because at the time that we are facing unprecedented economic crisis because of the pandemic and other problems that even started before the pandemic, this is the time that the United States and China decided to fight against each other. And in fact, it's an extremely irresponsible behavior by both sides, I should say, because the world economy is so much dependent on them, and all the rest of the smaller countries are so dependent on the stability in the US-China relations. So we almost have a perfect storm of strategic, financial, economic, social, and natural trend. Natural being like pandemics, natural disasters, climate change, things like this. And all of these together are reinforcing each other. So I'm saying a lot of challenges ahead. And I think that currencies will be just one of many components of the unfolding of this story, but certainly not the only one. It will be a derivative. It will be an ancillary to these major changes in the international system that are happening right before our eyes every day. With that optimistic note, I think I'm done. Unless there are other. On the issue of crypto, let me just say this about cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are first and foremost a challenge to the sovereign state currency system. Cryptocurrencies were created by people who don't like governments, controlling the economy. So these are rebels, okay? The people that are behind this are people that are unhappy with the way that the system. So I don't think that government will tolerate them much longer, because as long as cryptocurrencies are a small player of the level of under $1 trillion, it's a gimmick. They are allowed to do their thing. But the moment that governments will recognize them as a threat, they will shut them down very quickly. And we've seen already, you know, China blocked cryptocurrencies. Turkey, I think, is cracking down on exchanges. Because in the end of the day, governments always want to maintain control, and they're not going to give up control so quickly. So I think that cryptocurrencies will only be allowed to be relevant and to exist when they are not a threat to the nation states. But they have had an enormous impact on the virtualization of money And I see what today is crypto. By the way, there are about 2,000 cryptocurrencies around the world today. We only hear about Bitcoin, but there are many cryptocurrencies. And this is part of our learning process, how we test different technologies, we test different approaches, how each currency has different methodology, different way of issuing the currency, issuing a different way of trading the currency. So I think that it's like a laboratory. It's a currency laboratory. And the inputs of this and the experiences that are accumulated in this laboratory will be very important when we move full speed into the fourth generation of money, which I alluded to earlier, which is the virtual money. And I think what we will see is different types of central bank digital currencies, which will mirror the regular currencies, but they will offer all kind of benefits and all kind of new instruments, and also all kind of challenges to privacy, more government control over monetary transactions. There will be more exposure to cybersecurity problems, etc. So opportunities, but also challenges. I think that's the nature of every major change in history, and that will be the case with regards to the future of money too.
Okay, that was very, very interesting. This is, let's just leave this here at about 1 hour so that it has the flavor of a nice Turkish lokum. And however, we can in the future increase the number of lokums, the new ones. And hopefully, when we have that book translated into Turkish, and maybe other languages like French or Chinese or different languages, more people will read about it. These are very interesting topics, especially in the last 10 years, we have experienced so much volatility in the financial and monetary markets, starting with the 2008, and then September 2013 when tapering started, and then everything else, and then the cryptocurrencies, the rise of cryptocurrencies, and then, as you said, the U.S. Fiscal situation, which actually worries everyone. The fiscal situation of the U.S. is like a big bucket with a big hole under it, and the U.S. society, the U.S. politics, sociology they are not well equipped to repair that big hole. Like you said, it's like addiction. They know what is wrong, but they cannot take a measure about it. And the ultimate result is apparently, as you foresaw, will be the fall of US dollar, which will give rise to either one or more reserve currencies. But for an economist, this is really a fascinating laboratory. And I think your book is a good reference point in the history. And we are honored to basically have this webinar and also to publish your book in Turkish. Thank you very much, Dr. Gal. And we wish that in the next semesters you will be teaching these courses, if you have time, of course, to our students and international students. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, then we close this. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.